if you're the person there that is trying to influence, if you're trying to, get your audience's attention, you've got to manage the energy on the Zoom, on the Teams. So you may walk in, click join meeting, and find someone who's like, oh hi, yeah, oh god, heavy day. By all means, build rapport, but ultimately your job is to kind of pull them out of that and get them to re-energize themselves around the ideas that you're sharing. Yeah. So I spend a lot of time talking to people about the fact that they probably don't stand up enough, they probably don't move around enough, especially not necessarily during the middle of the call, but before it. What are you doing? Athletes prepare, actors prepare, they all have this kind of warm-up routine. Quite often as sales professionals, we're so focused on drilling through and getting the numbers cranked out that we don't actually press that magic reset button before we jump in front of a client.
You're listening to the Sales Today podcast, and I'm your host, Fred Copestake. On this podcast, we explore how sales professionals can develop a modern approach to winning business, the application of virtual selling techniques, how to create meaningful business relationships, and much more. Why not take our free collaborative selling scorecard to see how your sales approach suits today's environment? You'll find a link in the show notes. And welcome to this episode of the Sales Today podcast, where I'm delighted to be joined by Dominic Colenso.
Lovely to be here.
Yeah, Dominic, now you're a bit of a unique guest. Well, every guest's unique, of course they are, but I've never had a Thunderbird as a guest.
There you go, FAB.
FAB. You better just explain what I'm talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's now confused.
Yeah.
So I think what you're alluding to is the fact that I started my career as an actor, and my claim to fame is playing Virgil Tracy in the 2004 Hollywood remake of Thunderbirds alongside Sir Ben Kingsley and Bill Paxton. So that was my little moment in the spotlight. And now what I do is take those skills that actors use, that directors and the great kind of storytellers use, and share them with people in business to make them more impactful and influential in front of their audiences.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was referring to. Not that we'd had a bit of a chat and you were coming across as a little bit wooden. No, I mean, far from it. And I mean, that's the point of this conversation. That's why I wanted to have a chat with you, because I really want to kind of get into some of the things that you do about impact, how people can create impact, but how they can create impact virtually.
Yeah.
Because the bar's moved, hasn't it? It's moved from 2020, where we all kind of muddling through stuff. We've now got to do it professionally, I think, because we're sales professionals.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's fascinating. If you think back to 2019 and the amount of time you spent on Teams or Zoom, it was like negligible. It was really difficult to drag people into this forum. And now, even though we're back in the office, there's much more of a kind of hybrid approach going on. And certainly with the clients that we're speaking to, people are spending at least, I would say, 50% of their time, if not more, looking down the lens of the camera. And we can't just be kind of slightly poorly in frame with the mess in the background, or not being well mic'd, because those things do detract from our message very, very quickly. So that's certainly what we're working with clients right now, is to help them really differentiate themselves so that the virtual experience is as good as the face-to-face experience.
And I think it really can be a differentiator, can't it?
Yeah.
People are going to stop in this media. We know that. The stats are showing that.
Yeah.
So get good at it. And then you talk about don't let things distract as well.
Yeah. And I think what we have to acknowledge is that most people's first choice now is going to be virtual. If people are just trying to kind of check you out, get a feel for what you do, they're probably unlikely to say, yeah, I'll travel to meet you or travel to meet me and have an hour in my office. What they want is 15, 20 minutes down the lens of the camera where they can kind of check you out, get a feel for you. So that is your first impression. Now, obviously, that doesn't detract from the fact that you need to have a good offer. You need to have a good narrative to share. But quite often, it's like, what does this person look like? What energy are they bringing to the table? And if we've been back to back in Zoom calls for 4 or 5 hours, we've got to do something to shift ourselves out of it.
Yeah. But there's a massive opportunity there, isn't there? If they've been back to back in Zoom calls and everyone's rocking up the same, a little bit kind of average, and you come in and it's like, whoa, this stuff's different. I'm already into this.
Exactly.
We're up and running.
Yeah. And I think when you're thinking about virtual, if you're the person there that is trying to influence, if you're trying to get your audience's attention, you've got to manage the energy on the Zoom, on the Teams. So you may walk in, click join meeting, and find someone who's like, oh hi, oh god, a heavy day. By all means build rapport, but ultimately your job is to kind of pull them out of that and get them to re-energize themselves around the ideas that you're sharing. So I spend a lot of time talking to people about the fact that they probably don't stand up enough, they probably don't move around enough, especially not necessarily during the middle of the call, but before it. What are you doing? Athletes prepare, actors prepare, they all have this kind of warm-up routine. Quite often as sales professionals, we're so focused on drilling through and getting the numbers cranked out that we don't actually press that magic reset button before we jump in front of a client.
I mean, standing up is just such an easy thing to do. And I know people say, I haven't got a stand-up desk, whatever. Get a chair, stick on a desk. Quick. And your energy's there. You can breathe better. You can do so much better, can't you?
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes I'll flip this round and I'll just put the laptop on one of the bookshelves behind me, and then we're there, we're ready to go. So I would say that about 80% of my meetings I do standing up, because I know that I'm going to have a better energy for that. It's not for everyone, but if you're not standing up, you've got to be even more aware of the physical energy that you're bringing to the conversation.
Well, it's funny. So I'm sat down now. You're making me feel really bad. I might press pause and push the desk up. No, but for all training I am stood up. I actually use a flip chart. I go all kind of old school and everything. So, well, people like it. But shall we? Let's just check. I'm worried we might be running off into the woods, getting all excited about the new stuff. Are there any table stakes? Are there any things that we say, look, if you do not get this bit nailed, do not pass go, do not collect 200 quid, because you are on the path to failure already, and forget about anything else we're going to say? Are there any kind of sort of just basics we need to sort?
So I think probably in this new kind of hybrid world, one of the things to be really mindful of is information overload. So if you think about that rhythm of meetings that people are having, we're probably seeing people do, I don't know, 1 to 1.5 times, 1.2 to 1.5 times the number of meetings that they were pre-pandemic. And that means that there's just even more for people to digest. You can't communicate your whole features, benefits, timelines, blah 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 in a 15-minute meeting. So what are you going to choose? What is that kind of key message that you want to get across to your audience? How are you going to distill it down into something that's punchy, that is memorable, so that when someone presses end meeting, they've kind of got your key messaging seared across their forehead? So I think if there's one place to start, it's actually, what do I want people to know? What's the big idea that I'm about to communicate in the next 15-20 minutes?
Interesting, you're talking about 15-20 minutes, not an hour, not 45 minutes. I mean, one of the things I have to say to people is, like, even if you booked an hour meeting, aim for 45. Give them 50. Give them 15 minutes back. Actually, that's give a massively good impression. They'll love you for that for a start.
No one has ever said, "Oh God, that meeting finished early. What a shame. I was really looking forward to staying there for another." Absolutely. I think you've got to assume that if you book 30 minutes with someone, they're going to turn up 5 minutes late, or they're going to need 5 minutes just to kind of work out where the heck they are. And that ideally, by the time you get to that 25-minute mark, they're already thinking, oh goodness, I've got another meeting and I really could do with, putting on the kettle or going to the loo or letting the dog out, so their mind isn't with you. So you've got to factor that into your sales conversation and think, okay, I've probably got a captive audience for 15 to 20 minutes if I booked half an hour. What's the message?
Well, the notifications are coming up saying you've got another meeting, and then you started thinking, I'm prepped for that. Okay, so you start preparing it, and you sort of
Yeah.
nodding nicely and say, yes, very good, Dominic, very good. Oh God, I've got to go in there.
As,
That's more
and
important.
especially if it's your boss or one of your
Yeah.
clients, then I'm afraid the sales conversation drifts away and your mind is somewhere else.
So we're talking realistic objective, big idea.
Yeah.
I guess some of the other things, we probably just don't even mention this stuff now because you're expecting it to be right, but it's like having good audio. You said that.
Yes.
Having good video. Audio more important than video? Video more important than audio? Which way would you?
I would say people will forgive bad video, but they will lose interest very quickly if the audio is poor. So, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go out and spend a fortune on mics and that sort of thing. I mean, if anyone's watching the video right now, I've got a lapel mic on because I move around, so it's easier to kind of track me. But at the very least, hit record on a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting, whichever you use, preferably both, so that you've heard yourself on both platforms, and play it back, because you might be surprised at how poor the quality of the audio is in your laptop. And if you've never listened to it, you'll never know.
Yeah. So we've got that decent objective, realistic around the time frame part. So it'd be smart. Of course, it'd be smart. It's objective. Clarity on the big idea that's going to come across the result. Audio, video. Okay, that's basics. If you're not getting that right, seriously, question why you're doing stuff.
Yeah.
Now into some of the stuff that you're training people. You've already started talking about the energy piece. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, this was something that I learned very early on as an actor. So I went to a drama school called Drama Centre, very intense kind of method school. Tom Hardy was in the year above me, which kind of gives you a clue for the level of angst that was around. But I was really lucky in my second year. I got a job on a BBC period drama. It was called The Lost Prince, directed by a guy called Stephen Polyarkov. And the kind of cast list was a bit of a who's who of British actors. So there was Michael Gambon and Bill Nighy, who was one of my kind of heroes. Still is. I love him. I think he's brilliant. And I remember watching Bill on stage, on the sound stage, in front of the camera. And he was very different when he was in front of the camera than when he was just sitting down, waiting between takes or having a cup of tea. And I watched this for a while, and then I finally kind of plucked up the courage to ask him about it. So he used to be a smoker. I don't know whether he is now, but I remember kind of going out in the rain and offering to hold his umbrella so I could pick his brains. And I said, like, Bill, what's going on? What's the difference about being on screen compared to being kind of in this face-to-face environment? And he said, the camera sucks energy out of your performance. And that was a big aha moment for me as an actor. And as I've come to work with people in the business world, I've really tried to kind of make sure that they take that on board. If you've ever watched yourself back on video and you haven't been conscious about the level of energy that you're delivering, oftentimes you look back and go, oh, that was a bit flat, it was a bit dull. And that's because there's a digital distortion going on that means you have to up it a little bit. And I'm not, sometimes people say to me, oh, are you talking kind of jazz hands and being expansive? And it's not that, actually. It's about a level of focus.
Yeah.
It's about really being kind of present in that moment, not allowing yourself to get distracted, and channeling all of that energy down the lens of the camera and into your audience. So that's a big distinction for me. How energized are you? And what do you need to do to get yourself there?
Right. Going back to the length of the meeting, this stuff's tiring because that concentration level. So do yourself a favor of giving yourself a time to decompress, then bring it back up. Physically, I think you're saying that if you are going to stand up or something, you use your hands a lot, which again, people who are only listening to this, have a look on YouTube at this. Dominic's using his hands very deliberately.
And it is very deliberately. So it's let's pull back the curtain here. It's a bit of a pattern interrupt. So if someone is slightly distracted by their Outlook, for example, our brains are hardwired to look out for movement in our peripheral vision. So if you do put a little bit of gesture onto screen, then that person that had suddenly got distracted is now going, oh, hang on, is there a saber-toothed tiger? They're gonna lean in and listen a little bit more. So again, it's not to be just sort of flailing around for the sake of it, But when you're framing, when you're looking at what you look like on camera, like, is there a little bit of your shoulder in shot so that as you gesticulate, people can see your hands? Because if you look at news anchors or news reporters, this is the kind of framing that we're used to seeing. And it's as close as we can get to being across the meeting room table from someone.
Yeah. So doing that. So yeah, I love that. Yeah, you'll do a little movement. Again, if we are sort of showing behind the curtain, that's why I use flip chart. Because as soon as you move to write something on it, what's he writing? What's going on? What's happening?
Yes,
oh, yeah, he's moved. He's done that. Whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you use slides ever?
I do, but I keep the slides very simple and very deliberate. So I am very much about a visual narrative that is supporting what I'm talking about, kind of visual anchors for people and the key messages that I'm sharing, rather than 57 bullet points about the tools and techniques. So I think you've got to be really mindful. A lot of our clients are very technical. They have to share a lot of data. There are compliance issues around it. What I advise people to do is to simplify as much as they possibly can, to think about using 2 slides instead of 1. I think that there's a kind of idea that less is more, and that I've got to get everything I need onto 5 slides. That doesn't work on screen. It's just a mess.
You're right. No, it's because for years as presentation skills trainers, we've told people to use less slides, haven't we?
Yeah.
Now we're going, no, more.
Yeah.
In virtual, it's more. The little mantra I use is more, less, more. More slides, less on the slide, more things moving, like you say, to keep people's eyes. Something's happened there. If you really need to use them. Yeah.
And the other thing that people need to get good at is moving between themselves and the slide deck. So you can use sort of snazzy tools. I know you use Prezi, and that's a different way of doing things. But even if you're just going to be using PowerPoint, know where the buttons are on Teams and Zoom to be able to share that information, pop it up there so people can see it, and then turn it off so that they're looking at you again. And if you do that elegantly, then again, it's a good way of grabbing people's attention and visually steering them through what it is that you're talking about.
Yeah, again, from the old days, it sounds as though that's that long ago, but yeah, it was the old beaky.
Right.
What's a beaky? What's a bit? God, I hated it when you tell people that, and that was the biggest thing they took away from training. We've just spent 3 days doing presentation skills training, and but you're right, and practice, because in Zoom it's a big green button, isn't it?
Green button, yeah.
And then in Teams it's sort of hidden, but it's next to a big button, which is
exit.
How many meetings have you ended thinking you're?
I have that early lockdown, having been mainly using Zoom. I jumped onto a Teams meeting, started because the client insisted that their people couldn't access Zoom, and I'd done my practice, but I hadn't practiced enough because I did that classic leave meeting and had to kind of come back very, very quickly and go, so now I've caught your attention, let's move on.
I did it having made quite an important point, and then wanted to put the focus back on me. So it was a point with a slide, except I made the important point and left.
Yeah.
I came back and they're all giggling and they're going, "That's a bit of a mic drop, Fred." It's all like, "Oh, yeah, okay." Yeah, it's good fun. So practice is an important thing. Yeah. Cool. So gestures, slides. Yeah, use them simple, deliberate. You've used the word narrative a couple of times. I'd like to just explore that a little bit if we can.
Yeah. So obviously, in my previous world, it was all about storytelling. It was all about taking an audience on that journey. And I think sometimes in business, I see people a little bit reticent to embrace that idea of story because they think it's kind of fluffy. They think it's once upon a time. What we're really talking about is a narrative structure that is like easy for an audience to engage with. Many of us will sit and binge a box set, or we'll go and watch a trilogy of movies, or we'll go and see 5 James Bond films. And in reality, the structure of those experiences are exactly the same. We kind of know what we're going to expect, but that's really compelling. And it means that we can just sort of sit in and plug in and immerse ourselves in the experience. So if you can think about your sales pitch as having a narrative arc, as having a really clear beginning, middle, and end, who's the hero, who's the villain, what are some of those kind of crunch points? How do you finish with a really compelling, resolution that wraps everything up and tells people what the next steps are? We can learn a huge amount from Hollywood screenwriters in terms of how to structure our pitches and presentations.
And when doing that well, that's when you're saying we don't really need slides. We don't want the facts and figures anyway. With by telling the story, you're actually tapping into the oldest possible way of sharing information. When slides didn't exist, Zoom didn't exist, but actually. Yeah. Am I right? The brain doesn't know the difference between live and on screen anyway. It's still seeing a person, and it's hearing a person tell a story, and the story is hitting their emotional.
Yeah, and the thing that you're doing if you're sharing the slides too much and you're becoming that kind of tiny thumbnail size person on Zoom, is you're making the other person's brain work too hard, because they're looking at this tiny little version of you and it's been digitally distorted and it's small, but the brain's going, there's a person there and I can't read them. I can't understand them. I'm not seeing the micro movements in their face and I'm not understanding the full set of body language, but I know they're there, but they're not there. And that becomes a distraction in and of itself. So if we can create more human connection down the lens of the camera, then that's going to be a much more powerful experience for our audience. Yeah,
and then of course there's that other thing which I think is one of the big contributors to Zoom fatigue is that I know they're there, they're not there, but I'm there, but I'm not there because I'm here. the brain is doing stuff it really wasn't designed to do, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
See myself, but actually now I'm bigger than the person who. So it's. And what you're saying here is just be very, very conscious about all these things.
Yeah.
Just make them all play to you because. They're all marginal gains. When you stack them up, these actually do start to make quite a big difference.
They do.
And that's when someone's going to go away going, wow, that was just a really good meeting.
Yeah. It's like the little things, like being able to take moments to look down the lens of the camera. Now, when you and I are doing a podcast like this and we're all kind of set up and then there's no material to share in terms of slide decks, it's much easier to keep that kind of constant focus and create the illusion of eye contact. When you're in a meeting, you might be needing to look down at the chat window or your other people on in the room to make sure that they're nodding along. But when you've got those key messages to land, if you can bring those up and bring them to the lens, then again, people feel like you're connecting with them, and it's just much, much more powerful.
Yeah. It's another one of the reasons for standing and being a bit further back, isn't it? Because it's easier to be looking down the camera. I mean, certainly when I stand right at the back of this room, it's I can look at two different screens, and it is always looking as though. Yeah.
And you've got that in your peripheral vision, absolutely. Yeah. So I've got a second screen up here, and if I'm, sharing any content, it's on the second screen. I know my content well enough that I can just keep an eye on where we are, but mainly I can focus on my audience.
Again, practice. It's a practice skill, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a little bit counterintuitive.
It is, and you might feel weird, but your audience will feel great, and ultimately it's about them, not about you.
Yeah, because again, naturally we're trying to read the other person's body language. We've been told on training that's what you do, but if you're looking at them, you're not looking down the camera unless you really have managed to set it up so you can look through it.
Yeah.
And that becomes a tricky one. Lots of good ideas here. Lots of things which we can start to stack up to make our meetings really impactful. What else should I be asking? What have we not touched on yet?
I think probably the key thing, if we're going to bookend this beginning, middle, and end, is that call to action. Yeah. And it's just making the wrap up really crisp and really succinct. Again, if we go back to that idea that you're starting to lose people's attention in the last couple of minutes, what's the big ask that you've got? What's the logical next step? We're not looking for everything in that moment. We're just looking for the one thing that's going to move us closer to our goal. So I think that's the place to finish.
Cool. And we can certainly the way I think about it with this, and I'd love your opinion on it, is that because virtual is kind of, when I say easier to do, it's easier just to pop a meeting in. And certainly if you get known as the person that you can do stuff in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, you do stuff very, very quickly, and it's keeping the sale advancing, it's keeping moving on.
Yeah.
You don't need to bite off more than you can chew, because you pop in, do the stuff, we're all good, on to next step, off we go, we'll come back and do the next thing.
Exactly. I talk
It'll
about it
speed
being
stuff
like,
up, won't it?
yeah, it's like I talk about it as being a Netflix, series rather than a blockbuster film.
Yeah.
So you just want to be teasing up these, 20. I've got an 8-year-old daughter and a dog. I can't watch anything for more than 45 minutes is absolute tops. 25 minutes is the the ideal amount of time before life gets distracting. It's the same for people in business. So if you can tee up these 25-minute, 20-minute experiences, leave them wanting more, leave them needing to come back to you to reveal the next part of the journey, then you've essentially got your audience in the palm of your hand.
Yeah. So no, we're not going to do this. Get some duffers at the end of
yeah, there you go. Can we edit those in?
We can edit those in. It won't mean anything to any of the listeners outside of the UK. But
yeah, exactly.
It doesn't matter. We're referring to a soap opera, and it always ends on a climax. So brilliant. That is so cool. Highly energetic. Lots and lots of ideas. Where can people get in touch with you, Dominic? How can they get more? Because I know you're very, very generous on sharing stuff like this.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say connect with me in LinkedIn if these sorts of things have resonated. So there's lots of content going out there. It tends to be about a video a week, lots of tips and tricks posts and that sort of thing. Grab a copy of my book, which is Impact. That's on Amazon, on Audible, in your bookshops. If you want to explore training and keynote speaking and that sort of thing, either head over to inflow.global, which is the training company, or dominiccolenso.com, which is my speaker website.
Cool. We can pop those links into the show notes so people can get those. Excellent. Well, that's really cool. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat to us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Today podcast with me, your host, Fred Copestake. I hope you've enjoyed what you heard today. If you did, please get in touch and hit subscribe. And remember, you can take the Collaborative Selling Scorecard for free to check out how your sales approach works in today's environment. You'll find it in the show notes.